So I had an interesting discussion today about crypto depository receipts, and it's something I think gets overlooked a lot because you see a lot of these, especially in the ICO context, where people want to effectively transmute or write a de facto future on certain assets, typically some type of natural resource, in exchange for a token, and that token is representative of value. And a crypto depository receipt is really just a smart contract written on a decentralized blockchain, right? And it allows people, in the most technical sense, to effectively deposit their asset and receive a nominal token tokens in exchange, and that token inures them, as a right to always go back and effectively take that asset, the underlying asset, and the token holds value based on the net of the underlying asset. And you don't see the word, the actual nomenclature of this used often, but you see the practice sort of employed or try to be employed correctly fairly often. It's interesting, but really I think the big deal and the problem with a lot of these is that what you are effectively doing is creating a futures contract, right? Even if I deposit it, it's not akin to a bank or some sort of safety deposit or some sort of security situation. What you have here is really, by virtue of the blockchain and by virtue of the smart contract, what you're actually creating is some degree of a commodity, of a futures contract. And the reality is that obviously any sort of futures trading or swaps trading is governed by the CFTC and the Commodity Exchange Act, and you have to be considerate of those rules, much like you would the Securities Act or the Securities Exchange Act in the ICO context, which is obviously more common. But in this scenario, it's not so much the ICO; it's actually the ongoing operation of these platforms and how they work, and your ability to go back and effectively submit your token in exchange for an underlying asset invokes a great deal of commodities law. Most importantly, futures and to some degree rules regarding swap contracts and things like that. So it's something to consider. One exception, which I think sort of grandfathers in a lot of these projects, is the fact that a futures contract, if deliverable in under 28 days, is actually not subject to the Commodities Exchange Act. So for that reason, if you can really provide for immediate access to the underlying asset, there may be a way to be exempt from the Commodities Exchange Act, but that remains to be seen. Obviously, interpretation, is one thing, and the law says another thing. But if you could really, as a provider or promoter of this platform, provide that if I bring my token back and I can recapture that asset, the underlying asset, or if I purchase the token from a third party, and that's the most important part. If party A, exchanges the asset in exchange for the token, then sells the token for some other consideration, can that third party come back and recoup the asset in almost an immediate fashion? And that's really where I think this comes down to, because to the extent that you are not providing for what's effectively redemption, right, within that 28-day period, then I think you are going to start looking like a futures contract. And obviously, there's the issue of when those tokens start trading. Are those regulated futures? Are the exchanges that they're trading on regulated commodities exchanges? They're undoubtedly not, especially if they're within the United States. So there's something to consider, and obviously, again, the interpretation's only half the battle, because someone can, anyone from the CFTC to the SEC can, make exceptions to the rule, or it'll come out in some type of litigation. But as good as as smart contracts and as the promise that they have, especially in a decentralized environment, have, the underlying concept actually lends itself on an ongoing basis, far past the ICO, to regulation of another kind, and that's the commodities world, which oftentimes doesn't get a lot of play when you're talking about ICOs or cryptocurrency in general. But really, that's what that looks like, and it's a significant concern. So absolutely, if you have questions, comments, feel free to hit me up, tracyfirm.com. Take care.